September 26, 1983, just after midnight, Serpukhov 15 bunker 62 miles south of Moscow. Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov settled into his chair at the command center, beginning another routine night shift monitoring the Soviet Union's early warning satellite system. Around him, screens glowed softly in the dim bunker. Outside, autumn winds swept across the Russian steppe. Inside, the only sounds were the quiet hum of computers and the occasional shuffle of paperwork. Then, without warning, the alarm screamed to life. Red lights flashed across the control panel. The main screen pulsed with a single word in Cyrillic, Zapusk, launch. The computer system was reporting an incoming American intercontinental ballistic missile. One missile. Headed for the Soviet Union. Petrov had seconds to decide whether to report the attack up the chain of command, setting in motion a retaliatory nuclear strike that would end the world. This is the story of the night one man's decision, or refusal to decide, prevented World War III. The world in 1983 stood on the edge of nuclear annihilation. Relations between the United States and Soviet Union had deteriorated to their worst point since the Cuban Missile Crisis. President Ronald Reagan had called the Soviet Union an evil empire. 3 weeks earlier, on September 1st, Soviet fighters had shot down Korean Airlines Flight 007 after it strayed into Soviet airspace, killing all 269 people aboard, including an American congressman. The incident shocked the world and convinced many in Moscow that the Americans were preparing for war, using the civilian airliner as a spy plane. Soviet paranoia reached fever pitch. The Kremlin believed the United States might launch a surprise nuclear first strike disguised as a military exercise. American psychological operations, testing Soviet radar vulnerability with bomber flights near Soviet borders, only reinforced this fear. The Soviet military doctrine was clear and inflexible. If early warning systems detected an American attack, the response would be immediate and total. Launch on warning. Mutual assured destruction. There would be no time for verification, no room for doubt. The missiles would fly automatically. Into this powder keg walked Stanislav Petrov, a 44-year-old lieutenant colonel who had helped develop the software for the Soviet early warning system. He was not a typical military officer. Unlike his colleagues who were career soldiers trained to follow orders without question, Petrov had a background in civilian engineering. He understood computers. More importantly, he understood their limitations. The Oko Satellite System that Petrov monitored was new, rushed into service, and in his professional opinion, not fully trustworthy. It had malfunctioned before. The satellites orbited in Molniya trajectories, highly elliptical paths that brought them over North America for hours at a time, watching for the heat signature of launching ICBMs. But the system was temperamental, prone to false readings, vulnerable to atmospheric interference. Petrov knew this better than anyone. He had written parts of the code. When the alarm sounded that September night, reporting one incoming missile, Petrov's first instinct was skepticism. A single missile made no strategic sense. If the United States were launching a first strike, they would fire everything simultaneously. Hundreds of missiles, maybe thousands. Overwhelming Soviet defenses before they could respond. One missile was illogical. It was either a test, which seemed unlikely, or a malfunction, which seemed probable. But before Petrov could fully process his doubts, the alarm screamed again. Another missile detected, then another, then another. Within minutes, the system reported 5 American ICBMs in flight, all targeted at the Soviet Union. The screens pulsed red. The bunker erupted in controlled chaos. Officers shouted status updates. The protocol was clear. Petrov should immediately pick up the red phone and report the attack to his superiors at military headquarters. They would relay it to the General Staff. The General Staff would wake Yuri Andropov, the Soviet leader. Andropov would order a counterstrike. Soviet missiles would launch. American early warning systems would detect them. The United States would launch everything. Within 30 minutes, both superpowers would be destroyed. Within hours, nuclear winter would begin consuming the planet. Petrov sat frozen, hand hovering over the phone. His training screamed at him to follow protocol. His gut told him something was wrong. 5 missiles still made no sense. The Americans knew Soviet doctrine. They knew any first strike must be overwhelming. 5 missiles couldn't disable Soviet retaliatory capability. It was too few to be real. But the computers showed 5 clear launches. The satellites weren't malfunctioning now, the system insisted. This was happening. He had seconds to decide: report the attack and trigger Armageddon, or trust his instinct over the machines and risk Soviet annihilation if he was wrong. Years later, Petrov would describe that moment. "I had a funny feeling in my gut," he said. "I didn't want to make a mistake. I made a decision, and that was it." He did not pick up the phone. He waited. Minutes passed. The alarms continued screaming. The missiles, according to the satellites, were in flight. Still, Petrov waited. He demanded corroboration from ground radar. The Soviet radar network, which could detect incoming missiles once they cleared the horizon, showed nothing. No missiles, no launches, no American attack. The screens continued flashing. The alarms continued wailing. But the radar, the older, more reliable system, remained silent. Petrov made his call. False alarm, computer malfunction, no attack. He reported his assessment to his superiors, directly contradicting the satellite system. If he was wrong, if missiles were actually incoming and he had failed to report them, Soviet cities would be vaporized without warning. He would be responsible for the destruction of his country. But he was right. No missiles arrived. No nuclear detonations lit up Soviet cities. The alarm was false. Investigation later determined the cause: a rare alignment of sunlight reflecting off high-altitude clouds over North Dakota during the autumnal equinox. The satellites designed to detect the heat signature of launching missiles had mistaken reflected sunlight for rocket exhaust. A quirk of atmospheric physics, a flaw in the system's programming, nearly ended human civilization. Petrov expected recognition for preventing disaster. Instead, he received interrogation. His superiors were embarrassed. The satellite system, which had cost enormous resources to develop, had failed spectacularly. The scientists and military leaders responsible for Oko looked incompetent. If Petrov were officially rewarded, they would have to be officially punished. So they punished him instead. He was reprimanded for improper paperwork. His report on the incident, they claimed, was insufficiently detailed. He received no commendation, no promotion. He was quietly reassigned to a less sensitive position and took early retirement shortly after. For 16 years, the world knew nothing of what happened that September night. The story only emerged in 1998, when a Russian general published his memoirs mentioning the incident. Western journalists investigated, tracked down Petrov living in a small apartment outside Moscow, and asked him about the night he saved the world. Petrov was reluctant to claim hero status. "I was just doing my job," he insisted. "I was simply the right person at the right time." But as the full details became public, recognition followed. In 2006, the Association of World Citizens gave him their World Citizen Award. In 2011, Germany awarded him their prestigious Media Prize. In 2013, he received the Dresden Peace Prize and 25,000 euros. When asked if he considered himself a hero, Petrov remained modest. "All that happened didn't matter to me. It was my job. My late wife knew nothing about it for 10 years. Stanislav Petrov died on May 19, 2017, at age 77. His death went largely unnoticed for months. When news finally spread, tributes poured in from around the world. Former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said it was hard to imagine anything more devastating than all-out nuclear war between Russia and the United States, yet it might have occurred by accident were it not for Petrov's wise decision. The United States Congressman Adam Schiff tweeted, "You may not know Stanislav Petrov, but at the height of the Cold War, he saved the world." September 26th is now commemorated by some as Stanislav Petrov Day, a reminder to take a minute and not destroy the world. But the story raises uncomfortable questions that remain relevant today. Petrov saved humanity by disobeying protocol, by trusting human judgment over machine certainty. In a world increasingly reliant on artificial intelligence and automated systems, including weapons systems, his story is a warning. The Soviet early warning system was designed to remove human hesitation, to respond faster than any general could think. It nearly succeeded in ending the world because of a software flaw and reflected sunlight. Modern military systems are more sophisticated but no less fallible. Nuclear arsenals remain on high alert, capable of launching within minutes. Early warning systems are faster, more automated, and more prone to catastrophic error if something goes wrong. The United States and Russia still maintain thousands of nuclear weapons ready to fire on short notice. China is expanding its arsenal. Hypersonic missiles and cyber warfare add new layers of complexity and risk. The lesson of September 26, 1983, is that in a system designed for instant retaliation, human judgment remains the last and most important safeguard. Machines can calculate, humans can doubt. Petrov doubted, and his doubt saved 8 billion lives that never knew they were at risk. Imagine if Petrov had been a different person that night. If a strict military officer trained to follow protocol without question had been on duty. If the software engineer who understood the system's flaws had called in sick. If Petrov himself had been tired, distracted, or simply followed the rules, the alarm would have been reported. The chain of command would have been activated. Soviet missiles would have launched. The world would have ended, not because of malice or strategy, but because of reflected sunlight and bureaucratic rigidity. That's the terrifying fragility at the heart of nuclear deterrence. The fate of civilization rested on one man in a bunker south of Moscow making the right choice in seconds under unimaginable pressure. It rested on his engineering background, giving him insight into computer systems. It rested on his willingness to risk his career, his life, and his country by trusting his instinct over his orders. We live in a world that survived because Stanislav Petrov hesitated. The incident also reveals how close the superpowers came to war through sheer miscommunication and paranoia. Just 11 days after Petrov's decision, NATO conducted Operation Able Archer 83, a military exercise simulating response to Soviet nuclear attack. The exercise was so realistic, with new procedures designed to confuse Soviet intelligence, that the Kremlin believed it might be cover for an actual first strike. Soviet leader Andropov mobilized military divisions, transported nuclear weapons to launch sites, and scrambled bombers carrying nuclear warheads. The world came within hours of nuclear war twice in the same month, and most people never knew. Stanislav Petrov was not a general or president. He was a mid-level officer doing a routine shift. He had no special authority. He was not supposed to make world-altering decisions. But when the moment came, when the machines told him the world was ending, he chose to think rather than react. He chose to question rather than obey. He chose doubt over certainty. And that choice, that moment of human hesitation in a system designed to eliminate hesitation, saved us all. We owe our existence to a man who didn't trust computers, who understood that 5 missiles made no sense, who had the courage to wait when every instinct and every order told him to act. Stanislav Petrov spent the rest of his life insisting he wasn't a hero, that he was just doing his job. But his job that night was to decide whether humanity would see another sunrise. He decided yes. And because of that decision, you're here, reading this. The world continued. Children were born. Lives were lived. All because one man, in one moment, refused to end the world.